My name is Janie Steele. I was born January the 25th, 1940. I was born in Prairie Grove, Arkansas at the Elizabeth Hospital.
Okay, and this interview is for the Farmington Oral History Project, and we want to be sure we have your permission to reuse it.
You have my permission to use it.
Thank you, Janie. Tell me about your parents.
Well, my mother was Maureen Mays Buchanan, and my father was Thornton Buchanan, and I was raised on the house where Dad was raised, and his mother died giving birth to him, so his aunt raised him. And my mother's mother died when she was, I believe, 7, so her aunt raised her. So I didn't see but one grandparent in my lifetime, Fred Mays, mother's father. And they were very good parents. We didn't have much money, but we had a lot of fun.
Tell me about your siblings.
I had 2 sisters and 1 brother. My sisters were both older than I am, and my brother's younger than I am. And my oldest sister was 12 years older than I am, and my brother always thought she didn't belong to us because she was getting married the year he was born. And both my sisters died the same year. I lost them. And so all I have now is my younger brother, Henry Buchanan.
Okay. And what was your family's business?
Dad just did odds and ends jobs. Mother was a housewife. She took care of his aunt and uncle and all the kids, and she never worked out. Dad worked out. I remember he worked at a job once called Jerpies, and then later in life they started raising chickens, and so they did that for most of the rest of their life when they were working. And then when they quit doing that, they built the Cardinal Drive-In. There was no place in Farmington for the kids to congregate or eat or anything like that, and so they built that, and Mother and Dad let them name it. And so they did a good business there.
About what year was that, and tell me more about that.
We moved back here from California in 1965, so it was just right after that they built the Cardinal, because I helped her some on Saturday because I had worked at a restaurant before and I knew kind of what was going on, and they really had never done that before. But they did real well, but it was hard work, long hours, but they enjoyed it. They enjoyed being around the people.
Farmington was real small back then. That must have been a real gathering place for people. Tell me about that. What was that like?
Well, like I say, there was no other place to even buy a Coke except at a grocery store, and so they had lots of business. That I worked on Saturday to help them sometimes, and sometimes we had people stop there. All the trucks stop in there. Sometimes we'd have 100 hamburgers ordered at a time. We were really busy.
What other jobs besides working there did you do when you were growing up?
I babysat kids when I was a little young girl, and then when I decided I was going to finish school early, I lived with my sister in Fayetteville on Dixon Street of all places, and the Palace Drug Store was right across the street, and so me and some of my girlfriends got jobs there, and I worked and paid for my rent.
When you were a kid growing up at home, what were some of the routines y'all would do at home, and what were some of the things y'all would do, some of your, like around mealtime and things like that? What would y'all do at home?
Well, we always sat down for our meal. You know, unlike a lot of people nowadays, they don't necessarily all get together, but we did. We were always there. And Mother always had enough food. She never knew if I was going to come home by myself or if I was going to have 5 girls with me, but she always had enough food fixed for us. And it was just a good time gathering place for us to visit.
what did you do to help out around the house? What were some of the things you would do as a kid?
We would do the dishes and things like that, or just pick up and around. Mother did the outside things like milk the cow and things like that, but we didn't do that.
So y'all had a cow?
We had a cow, and that's why I don't like milk nowadays. Mother would fix hot chocolate and have that stuff on the top from the cow. And I didn't like to have that cream floating to the top. And so I've never liked milk since then. I know in school we'd have those long tables to sit at, and we couldn't go out and play until we ate all our food and drank our milk. And everybody knew that I wouldn't drink my milk. So they passed my milk underneath the table and everybody took a drink, get rid of it.
What are your earliest memories of Farmington community in the town?
Well, I was born here, and I can remember we always walked to school because we didn't live quite far enough to ride the bus. And it may be snowing like mad, and they may not have any on the bus, but they wouldn't stop and pick us up. I remember walking up there, and it seemed like snow was knee deep, but I don't guess it was. It just seemed that way. But I remember before that even, but when I was in school, when I started school, we would walk down Ray Mills Road, which was a dirt road at that time. And this was after school, and we would go down to the post office and see Russell and Claire and pick up our mail. And the post office then was where Ray Robbins' realty is, only it was turned the other way. And visit with them. And then we'd either go over to Miss McNeil's grocery store or White's grocery store and have something to drink if we were lucky enough to have a nickel or whatever it cost then. And then we would walk through the woods home, cut through the woods to get home. Where the subway is, that's where we'd take off and go through the woods.
Tell me about those little grocery stores.
Well, we had White's grocery store, which I ran around with her granddaughter. She lived with her grandparents. And then we had Miss McNeil's grocery store and Phillips grocery store were the main ones that we had. Now later on we had a called Witter's grocery store. But Miss McNeil sold more than just groceries. She sold dry goods and different things there. Hers was a little bit bigger store.
What other businesses do you remember in town? I know there weren't a lot, but what do you remember in town? What businesses do you remember being here?
Just the Stark's Nursery was the main thing, and Hobo Higwood was managing of that. And of course I ran around with his daughter Margie, and one of my sisters ran around with Joanne. And
tell me about Stark's. What was it and what did they do and where was it?
They had places rented all over around here. Over towards Weddington even, they had places rented to have, I think they used them like 3 years and then they'd change, I guess because of the soil. I don't know that much about the soil. But we always had fun because of the grape vineyard. I had a certain grape I like and I knew which row it was, and that's where I'd get me some grapes. Of course, I acted like I was stealing them, but Hobo didn't care that we got them.
So what all did Stark's grow here? Tell me about Stark's some more.
I know they had grapes, but I think they had other fruit too. And that's when the railroad was coming through here, so they could put their produce on the train to go, to leave out. But I can remember across the street, across the highway, they had a big field, I guess where the, close to the ballparks. No, maybe not quite that far. And that was full of different things out there. But I mainly remember the grapes.
Tell me about the railroad. What's the history of the railroad here in this town that you know?
It came along almost along the highway there, where the highway is now, and it cut across close to my house, where I live on Neal Street. And it cut across the creek, and then went up the hill, and where 170 is, it came sort of beside that, and the depot was on the left-hand side of the road there, more into the field a little bit.
Tell me about going to school in Farmington.
I started school, and this was before they added on to the grade school. And I started when I was 5 years old, and Marie Brown was my first grade teacher. And I remember one of our favorite things to do was to find holes, cracks in the bricks, and walk around the schoolhouse, holding onto the bricks. We used to do that every day. But we didn't have, I can remember when we had wood stoves in the school and outdoor toilets.
Tell me more about the school.
Well, I remember that Ray Davis, I believe he's your granddad, helped build the high school. Did you know that?
Mm-hmm.
People were close. You knew everybody. The school was that small, and you knew everyone. And we're pretty close-knit people. You know, just didn't know just your room. You knew all the grades. You knew everybody.
Tell me about some of your classmates that you remember, that were your closer friends, maybe.
Shirley Smith, which her grandparents owned White's grocery store. She was my closest friend. I have pictures of us as babies sitting on a quilt, so we went way back. She was my closest friend, and then when Pat Tedford moved in, she was another one of my real close friends. And then Aline Kamak, which she married Bill Beckett. She was another one that moved in here, and we were all real close.
What about some of the teachers you remember?
I remember Miss Brown, my first grade teacher, and my second grade teacher was, I can't even remember now. But in high school, later in high school, or junior high, my favorite teacher was Miss Hazel Penn and Mac Hamlin. I really liked them.
Tell me more about Hazel Penn.
Hazel did all different kinds of things. She was a librarian at one time. She was my home ec teacher at one time. So she probably taught most every grade and everything. And I really liked her. She was kind.
Who are some others you might remember from the school?
People or teachers?
Yeah, anybody that you think of.
Oh, I remember most of everyone that I went to school with, no matter what grade it was. My sister's grades or my grade on down, and we still have all school reunions, where we all get together, and it's good to see those people.
Tell me about some of the people who are prominent in the community that you remember back when you were a kid. Who are some of the people from the community?
My age, or?
No, the adults back when you were a kid. Who are some of the adults that were the community leaders and people you might have known?
Well, of course, the people that owned the store were pretty prominent leaders, and the leaders in the church.
Tell me about your church. Where did you go to church?
Okay, to begin with, my sister Sue, that was closest to me, we would walk over the hill, down the hill, across the creek, and up the hill, and we'd go to the Methodist church by ourselves. And then later on, we went to the Christian churches where the Nazarene church is now. And we got our parents going, and they were saved. And then we had a big revival in Farmington. It was a tent revival, and they had it where the Main Street Baptist Church is now. And everyone that was belonged to the Christian church joined it, preacher and all, except one person. So she ended up owning the old Christian church. And then, so I was around when they were building the churches now, the Main Street Baptist Church. That isn't where I go now. We later on had grown big enough that we moved out to the Ray Mills Church on my Ray Mills Road. And so that's where I attend church now.
When you were a kid, what would you and your friends do for fun?
We had big sleepovers and parties. We had lots of parties. Instead of dating and things, lots of times we just have parties and everyone would get together. And I had lots of sleepovers. I had lots of people come home with me, and we just talk and giggle and be silly.
When you were a kid, what did the adults in the community do for entertainment?
Well, there wasn't much to do. They would, of course, go to church and take part in the school, like the PTA and things like that. Most people help promote the school.
Let's talk about your involvement in city government. I know there was a time that you were on the city council for many years. Let's talk about when you first got on there. What prompted you to get on there? What was the city like back then?
Well, I was first on the planning commission, and for some reason, I was always interested in government. Well, I started out being interested in the school. I started out being a homeroom mother for all three of my kids, and I was always a leader in the PTA and things like that. And so I don't know whether that prompted me to get interested into the city later on when my kids were, bigger. But after I got on the council, I was on there for 28 years. I've only been off for a couple of years now.
What year did you start in the planning commission? Let's talk about what it was like back then in the planning commission. Or approximately, if you can't remember exactly.
Well, that would have been at least 30 years ago.
What was the city like back then?
We were small, but we were starting to grow. Well, I'll start out like this. My father was on the city council. I mean, he was on the city council at one time, and then he became mayor. And after he became mayor, my husband was mayor. But my husband only went on because the city was going broke, and he helped get the finances in order, and then he got off. He didn't stay real long. He stayed several years, but not his full term. And
tell me more about that. What did he have to do to try to get the city finances in order?
Just really watch what they spent, cut down on what people were doing. Like watch the gas. People didn't just drive the cars home and drive them around as their own personal cars, and just be cautious with the money.
How tight was money back then for the city?
Well, I know they were just about broken almost when my husband took over, and he hired an attorney for the city, Lamar Pettis from Fayetteville. You may know him, and we laughed because they didn't take pay. Either one of them was taking pay. They were doing it for nothing then. And one month they had $25 extra, so they decided they would split it. But they, like I say, when he got it back in shape, then he got off because his health was starting to get bad.
Now, tell me about when you first got on the city council and then the different years you served, what all you remember. Who was mayor when you first started? Was it
I
Roy
believe
Hummel? I'm not sorry.
Roy
Was it,
Drake.
Roy Drake.
Yeah, I believe Roy Drake was.
Tell
Roy
me about
Drake.
that.
My husband's went to talk Roy into running because Roy was the trash man. But my husband told him, he said, you would do a good job. Go ahead and run. And he did, and he made it. And after him, I believe it was Ted Ingram, and then probably Ernie. Ernie served 2 different times. I think one time he just served 1 term, and then he got off. But we eventually got to the point that we're in really good shape right now. So it's good to hear that.
Tell me about the town. Kind of start with the 80s and 90s and come forward what you remember about each decade, because the town has really changed.
Yeah, my parents wouldn't believe it. The stuff that's going on now, they wouldn't believe the amount of people that are out here. Used to, a long time ago, people didn't want their kids to would rather their kids didn't go to Farmington school. Now people would like their kids to go to Farmington school because they have a good reputation as being a good school and good teaching. And I think Mayor Penn has done real well with the city. He's helping them grow and helping them. Money-wise, he's seen that they have a good reserve and everything. And we've just had more people move in, more businesses move in. It continues to grow, seems like. What I do, there's another store that had been opened up last week. And then the Taco Bell's going in. There's, it just continues to progress along.
I know back in years past, and now they've started again, the city had done a fireworks display. I think they did it back under Mayor Carlisle, and then in recent years they've added that back. What do you know about the history of that?
Yeah, they try to have one every year, and they try to coordinate it with Prairie Grove so they don't have them on the same night. And they have such a crowd come. I know we had been to a party earlier this year, and we came back by and we couldn't find a parking place or a place to stand. And I said, well, pull in McDonald's because I go down there a lot, so they won't care if we use their parking lot. So we pulled in there, and everybody seems to enjoy it, and we have people come from quite a ways to watch it. It's pretty good fireworks.
Another tradition in Farmington has always been the pancake breakfast. Did you ever attend that?
Yeah, I always go to that.
Tell me about that. How big a deal is that for Farmington?
The foreman worked real hard to put it on because I know I've asked them. I said, you ought to do so well, why don't you do this twice a year? And they said, oh no, it's too much trouble. But they work long hours, but they put out a lot of pancakes, and everybody seems to enjoy it a lot. And of course, if there's any politicians, anyone running for office from anywhere, they'll come to the pancake breakfast. But it's well attended. Mark does a good job with them.
Farmington is known also for having a real good fire department, both now and in the past. What do you know about the history of the fire department?
I think Bill Andrews was probably the first fire chief, and then C.D. Pike, and then Mark took over.
Tell me about C.D. Pike. What all did he do for the city?
Of course, I don't remember that as well as I do Mark, but he did well for the city also. He was a good fireman. And his wife, I think this may have been after he passed away, that she got on the city council, Patsy Pike. And she does a good job.
What other stories about Farmington can you remember, or about your family that you want to share?
Well, I can remember hearing him tell about when Mother, she lived close to Highway 16, and when White Rock started coming over here to Farmington, she and her two sisters had to ride their horses over here. And so their dad, my granddad, built them a shed out on the school ground to keep their horses in. I thought that was kind of funny that they would do that and allow that, but they did. And my father was mostly known for his sports. I never saw him box, but I guess he was an excellent boxer. And he boxed until he knocked someone out for 72 hours, and he thought he'd kill him, and he didn't box anymore after that. He didn't. The man made it, but he didn't want to kill someone. And but he played baseball until he was 50 years old. So we grew up going to baseball games all the time, and therefore he ended up at the end playing for Prairie Grove, and so we knew most of the kids from Prairie Grove then, because we'd see them at the games and became friends with them. And
tell me about those adult leagues that would play baseball back then, because we've heard some stories about those.
Yeah, they tell a story about Dad, that he would work in Fayetteville, and then he'd walk home and eat lunch or eat dinner, and then he'd walk back in and either box or play a ball game. They used to play, the fairgrounds used to be where the Razorback Road is, right close to that now. He'd have a game there or something, but they had, each town I think almost had an adult league, which they don't do that anymore around here. But the one in Farmington was right across the street where Casey's store is right now. That's where their ball field was. And Dad was a left-handed pitcher, and he was well known for being a good ball player.
Did he have a nickname? What was his?
Hornbuckle Buck. And Jerry Hogan had written about him several different times, stories about him, and that's how we got to know him, Jerry. And he told me one day, he said, "Janie, I went out to the Farmington Cemetery and looked for Hornbuckle Buck, and I could not find it anywhere." I said, "Well, Jerry, we didn't bury him under his nickname. We buried him under his real name." I told him where to look next time he was out here.
What other stories do you know about him playing ball? How good was he? Where all did he play?
Just about everywhere. Of course, I remember best was when I was a little bit older, and he played in the Prairie Grove thing. But he played in some pretty big games before that I wasn't big enough to understand about or go to.
Who were some of his teammates that you remember from Farmington area?
I remember Jim Brooks. And Jim Brooks I think his mother used to be our lunch lady years ago. Miss Lucy was what we called her. And let's see, who else besides Jim? I can't even think of any names now. Buster Dunlap used to play with him. Mm-hmm.
If someone asked you to tell them about your hometown of Farmington, what would you tell them?
I'd tell them it was a very good place to live and grow up, raise your family. It's a friendly town. It's very convenient to everything also. I mean, if there's not things to do here that they would want to do, Fayetteville's just a hop and a skip from here. And it's close to the university.
If someone asked you to finish this sentence to say, "My favorite thing about Farmington is," what would you tell them that your favorite thing about Farmington is?
My favorite thing about Farmington, I don't know, I just like the atmosphere of a small town. I I don't know everyone like I used to. I mean, there's lots of people I don't know now, but it's still a very friendly town. It's very church-oriented. People care about the school, about their community.
Anything else?
Well, I'd highly recommend someone to raise their family here. It's a good place to raise their family.
Would you have ever thought back when you were on the planning commission in the 80s that this town would be 6,000 people by now?
No, because I don't remember what it was then, but it wasn't a whole lot.
Do you remember whenever the Sue Lossing and them, I think it was Billy Joe Bartholomew and I forget who the other one was, maybe Gary Stearman owned that property where Southwinds is?
Yeah, I remember.
Talk about that decision. Wasn't there some opposition to that at the time?
I don't know so much about the opposition. I know that I was in favor of it, you know, because growth, you have to grow.
What was the town like when you were looking at that decision? Kind of tell me more about that, if you can remember.
Well, that's probably one of the starts for us to start growing when they built over there on the South Winds and in that area. One of my daughters lived there for quite a while. And that happened to be on the old Griff Wilson farm, and part of Stark's brother's place was out there. And so it had a lot of good memories there too. But I don't know whether that had anything to do with what their opposition would be or not.
You saying they weren't really against it, they just weren't sure that it would ever grow out that big?
Yeah, I think so.